What makes men behave violently towards their partner? You saw Dr. Julia Shaw, the criminal psychologist and author who features in that series. She joins me now here in the studio. Hi, thanks for joining us, Doctor. Appreciate it. Women are more vulnerable in their own homes than anywhere else.
Yeah, I think we have this mystified idea of the murderer as the stranger, as sort of someone in a dark alley who's lurking, who's maybe a psychopath. But actually, it's most often a loved one who especially as an escalation of domestic violence, commits murder, especially of women. Why
do men kill their partners?
I think usually it has to do, when we look at the evidence as to what people cite as the reasons, one of the main ones is jealousy. Another one is this idea that it's either a former partner or a partner who the person is concerned will leave them, with the idea being that if I can't have her, nobody can, which is very different from the way women often respond to these kinds of situations, because intimate partner violence is less likely to be perpetrated by women. Of course, there are still situations, but it's much less likely. And certainly intimate partner homicide is much less likely for women.
So it's about control?
I think a lot of it is about thinking that women are, in a basic sense, objects to be owned. And I think that is still a deeply ingrained mentality that sort of women belong to men. And so again, this idea that if she's not mine, then she's an object I can destroy. I'd rather destroy her than share her with somebody else.
Can you spot a killer before they commit a crime?
There are some warning signs when we look at domestic violence. So, domestic violence and rape, not fantasies as much, more myths. So endorsing certain kinds of myths around, again, sort of ownership around believing that women are asking for trouble, victim blaming, those kinds of things. Those we know are risk factors for engaging in violence towards women. But I think overall we'd be surprised by who's capable. It is mostly those who we love the most who are capable of these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I think overall we need to stop demonizing the idea of murder. I think everyone is probably capable of murder given the wrong context, right context, if you will. And I think that we need to stop pretending it's sort of an us versus them. It's us, the good people, and them, the evil people, them, the purple people who are capable of murder. So for me, that sort of idea of evil, I think, really needs to be broken down so that we can better understand these issues.
Yeah, are you mad or bad? We often hear that comparison, don't we? What's your view on that?
There's mad or bad, but then there's also mad or bad, and then there's me. We almost always, I think, consider ourselves outside of this category. And this is even true for people who have offended, who are in prison, for example. We all have our own rationale, we have our reasons, we understand the nuances of our behavior. And so we still say, no, but I was justified, or maybe I regret it, but that's not me in my entirety. I'm still a human being. I'm still mostly not that, not bad or mad. Whether mental health issues contribute to these kinds of issues, I think that link is generally overstated. Again, there is a small overlap, especially with things related to substance abuse. So if you're self-medicating for things like depression with things like using illicit substances, you're more likely to engage in violent behavior. But overall, mental health issues are almost never connected with risk for violence.
Are we more tolerant of women that commit murder as potentially a crime of passion as opposed to men?
Probably. It is comparatively rare, so I think the circumstances that lead to a woman murdering someone are generally going to be more extreme and perhaps also more understandable. So I think, again, things like domestic violence often also precedes, so there's almost the other way around. So it's not the woman is acting in a violent way towards her husband or partner repeatedly. It's more often that the partner is actually engaging in domestic violence against the woman, and the woman basically fights back, which I think is... it's easier, I think, to empathize with that kind of situation, even though, of course, it's a completely inappropriate response to that kind of situation.
When we see... domestic violence isn't necessarily a private matter, is it? Because when you look at, I don't know, Ted Bundy or whatever, and the number of people that he has murdered and allegedly murdered, when you look back at his lifestyle, there would have been violence in his background?
This is I think we need to be very careful not to look back at the past of people who we know as adults have committed crimes and to basically blame their past and blame their upbringing, and the way that I sometimes say it, don't just blame their mom. We're back to sort of blaming the woman in a man's life to have sort of ruined him, which I think is just... it's totally oversimplifying a really complex issue. Certainly people who engage in most kinds of offending behavior are more likely to be from impoverished upbringings. They're more likely to come from low socioeconomic status. However, there are, of course, many exceptions. And of course, having low socioeconomic status doesn't mean that you're going to become an offender. So it's, I think, a lot of people grow up in terrible circumstances and turn out fine, and a lot of people grow up in great circumstances and turn out not fine. So I think that dynamic, I would caution us to look back and say that's why, because it's always going to be a confluence of factors.
Is there anything that women can do to make themselves safer at home when they potentially, well, from what you're saying, you don't necessarily know that that's what's going to happen, that your partner is going to come along and feel that you can be destroyed if they can't have you, no one can? Yeah,
of course. I mean, generally we would presumably not put ourselves in those kind of situations. And that's also why, of course, intimate partner murder specifically is most likely committed by people we trust. That's why we find ourselves in situations where they're able to commit those kinds of crimes. To protect ourselves, I mean, in my book, Making Evil, I actually talk about murder and I talk about the banality of it. Some of it is really banal. Some of it I think you just can't see coming. But other things, I mean, if you are in a situation, for example, where you're the victim of intimate partner violence, trying to seek help, trying to seek resources. Now, in an age of budget cuts, in an age of cutting of funding to things like women's refuges, and of course cultural issues around who's able to seek those kinds of services and who feels able to, I think there's a lot of barriers that we need to break down as society also to actually offer proper support to individuals who find themselves in high-risk situations.
Fascinating, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.